Typical Thursday afternoon in a quiet suburban town, nestled somewhere between the winding highways and quiet backroads of the American heartland, the kind of town where the days seem to stretch endlessly. And the most excitement people could expect was the occasional parade or high school football game. But today, as the sun began to dip behind the horizon, this small town was about to witness something far more intense than anyone had ever anticipated. At the heart of the town stood the Civil Defense Center, a facility known for training and supporting local responders in times of crisis. The operations room, often filled with the quiet hum of computers and phones, served as the command center for emergencies of all kinds, from severe weather to civil unrest. It was here that soldiers, local law enforcement, and emergency medical teams would coordinate efforts to protect the community in times of need. But it wasn't just any soldier sitting behind the large monitors in the operations room that afternoon. Sergeant Ethan Cole was no ordinary soldier. Having spent over a decade in the Army, including multiple tours overseas, his experience had shaped him into a calm, collected individual with a near unshakable demeanor. It was his expertise that had brought him to this assignment at the Civil Defense Center after his time in active duty. Here, in the heart of the operations room, he helped coordinate disaster response and manage critical situations for the local population. On this particular day, Sergeant Cole had just returned from a brief break outside the building. The air was crisp, the sky clear, and his mind was focused on the tasks at hand. He was in charge of the evening shift, a role he took seriously, despite the peaceful nature of the town. But when he walked back into the operations room, he sensed that something was different. The front doors of the facility swung open with a thud. It was a group of bikers, at least 5 of them, their leather jackets adorned with patches and symbols of their motorcycle club. They rolled in on their heavy bikes, revving their engines as they made their way through the parking lot, clearly showing off their presence. Ethan could hear their laughter and loud voices from the operations room windows. It wasn't uncommon for groups of bikers to pass through the area, but there was something about their energy that felt off today. "Hey, you guys think we can grab some of that coffee in the break room?" one of the bikers yelled, his voice full of arrogance. He was a tall man with a beard, wearing a patch that read "Wolves of the Highway." Sergeant Cole narrowed his eyes and briefly looked at the monitor in front of him. The situation in the room was calm routine checks, and coordination were in progress, but he could feel a gnawing sense of unease. These bikers were likely not here by coincidence. They had a reputation for causing trouble in towns they passed through, and today, they seemed determined to stir up some chaos. As Cole stood up from his desk and walked toward the door to confront the group, one of the bikers, an imposing figure with a bald head and a scar running down his face, approached him. His name was Rick Bull Grayson, and he was known for his intimidating presence. The 2 men locked eyes. "You in charge here?" Bull asked, his voice rough, almost challenging. He was holding a half-empty beer bottle, which he tossed aside without even a glance. "I am," Sergeant Cole replied coolly, his hand instinctively brushing over the edge of the desk, where his service weapon was stored, though he didn't reach for it. "Can I help you?" The biker let out a low chuckle. "We were just looking for a little break, man. Maybe grab a drink, maybe have some fun. You wouldn't want to be the guy who messes up our good time, right?" Sergeant Cole didn't flinch. He'd dealt with people like this before. He'd been in war zones, had stared down men with weapons, and survived situations far more dangerous than this. But he knew how to defuse situations without escalating them. "You're welcome to grab a drink, but this is a federal facility," Cole said, his tone firm but respectful. "We don't allow alcohol on the premises, and I'd suggest you leave the building once you're finished." Bull stepped forward, blocking Cole's path. "I don't think you understand who you're talking to, soldier. We don't take orders from people like you." The other bikers laughed, egging on their leader. But Cole wasn't fazed. He had been in situations where his life had been on the line. This, however, was different. This was his town, his home, and he had a responsibility to protect it. "Last warning," Cole said, his voice calm but filled with authority. "If you don't leave now, I'll have to call local law enforcement." Bull scoffed. "You think the cops can stop us?" At that moment, Sergeant Cole's eyes narrowed. The sound of motorcycles revving outside grew louder, and the group of bikers began to inch forward, their movement threatening. But Cole knew the town's resources better than anyone. He hit a button on the side of his desk, and, almost immediately, the security cameras throughout the facility came to life on the monitors. His fingers tapped rapidly, activating a direct line to local police. "I'm calling for backup," he said. "Last chance." Bull's eyes flickered, a small hint of uncertainty crossing his face for the briefest moment. His group, once cocky and brash, began to realize that they were in a situation they hadn't anticipated. Sergeant Cole wasn't just any soldier. He was part of a well-trained, organized system. And that system was watching. The other bikers started murmuring amongst themselves, their bravado faltering. Sergeant Cole, sensing the moment of doubt, stepped forward just as the local law enforcement sirens began to blare in the distance. The bikers knew they were out of their depth. They weren't going to win this fight. And they certainly weren't going to ruin their evening by getting arrested. "You're outnumbered, and you're out of line," Cole said firmly, his gaze locking onto Bull's. "You've made your point. Now leave." For a moment, the tension hung thick in the air, but the bikers, realizing they had pushed too far, finally backed down. Bull grunted in frustration, shooting Cole one last venomous glare before turning around to join his group. They mounted their bikes, revving the engines in a show of defiance, but the air had shifted. The intimidation that had once been so palpable had melted into retreat. The bikers sped off into the fading light, their figures disappearing into the horizon. The sound of their engines slowly faded, leaving the operations room in silence. Sergeant Cole didn't watch them go. Instead, he stood in the doorway, his eyes scanning the street outside, making sure they were truly gone. It had been a small confrontation, but it had reminded him of the power of his training and the importance of maintaining control in a world that seemed to always be on the brink of chaos. As the law enforcement arrived minutes later to check on the situation, Cole briefed them quickly. There was no need for a report, no need for a dramatic conclusion. The town was safe once again. The bikers had messed with the wrong soldier and had learned that some people in this world weren't afraid to stand their ground. Inside the operations room, life returned to normal. The quiet hum of computers and radios resumed. But Sergeant Cole, ever vigilant, knew that the peace they had earned today could be fragile. And as long as he was around, he would be ready for whatever came next. For in a world filled with uncertainty, one thing was certain: Sergeant Ethan Cole would never back down from protecting what was his.